we're just going to roll right into it because you have quite the backstory of operations all over probably the world. You worked with a 3-letter agency. You wrote a pretty successful book. Let's just get into it.
You want like the name, ranks?
Yeah, name, rank, social. Let's do it.
Drew Coussens. My surname, my actual name is Andrew Coussens, but my mom called me Andrew, so I was over that. As soon as I got like to 18, I was like,
done.
Yeah, stop calling me for dinner, Mom. Mm-hmm. The backstory is interesting, man. I was a Fed for a while, doing narcotics interdiction for CBP, and kind of at the time I wasn't really into the law enforcement end of it. There's just too much. I mean, I could go into huge detail, but red tape and duty officer stuff. Mm-hmm. And before that, I did some wildland firefighting, hot shots, heli rappel stuff, search and rescue. So I started to gravitate more towards the search and rescue end of it, which is called Borstar for CBP. And in 2002, the Winter Olympics, interesting story here, and definitely something I feel was the result of several prayers. I don't know if his
Are you picking that up?
Pick that up.
Are you?
It's funny.
Is he in the camera? No. For anybody that's hearing some chewing, it sounds like a ball in a giant dog's mouth. Oh, you see his head? We got a pretty awesome service dog with us today.
He's usually pretty calm, so I probably should have omitted the ball, but he likes it on the bear rug there.
Yeah.
So it was post 9/11, and everybody thought we were going to get hit, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody wanted to play. All the federal agencies wanted to come to the party. So the only thing they had available was a 16,000 square foot hangar in Mountain Green, Utah, on the other side of the Wasatch Range, which faced the Super G, which was going to be at Snow Basin. Mm-hmm. So that was a huge operation. I had worked consequently with the FBI before, and with NEMO teams, National Incident Management Organization teams, which tries to bring everything together. We did the Columbia Shuttle disaster recovery.
Really?
And I knew from experience that the FBI didn't really play well with others. Mm-hmm. They used their own frequencies. It was very difficult getting a briefing.
Why is that? Why?
I mean,
you see it even in movies and shows. FBI shows up, you hear stories, and nobody likes to work with the FBI.
100%. Now, with the exception of the HRT guys. So I got to meet HRT guys while I was downrange in Bagram. Okay. Bagram's got a compound kind of dedicated to federal agencies, 3-letter agencies, to kind of be separate, task force stuff, to be separate than the rest of the mill. Although they did work closely with CJ SOTIF, which is the Combined Joint Special Operations force there, and the HRT guys were really squared away.
Yeah.
Probably because they co-train a lot with their Tier 1 partners, with CAG and
they're not at the flagpole playing.
Correct.
Playing the political game. These guys are actually out training and making a difference.
Correct.
So they're not.
I think they're given a lot of latitude there to kind of be their own operator. But I just found it really difficult. We were all kind of broken up into quadrants and just had difficulties there, especially when it came to air. We had helicopters fly by and didn't realize another helicopter was in our airspace, and lo and behold,
shit.
Yeah.
That's kind of sketch.
It is. So let me go through the hit list for the agencies that were at Mountain Green. I believe it was Secret Service, U.S. Marshals, and it was of course they had their regular element, and then some of them sometimes would have their special operations or special unit element there, like SRT or whatever. But FBI. DHS had just formed, and a lot of these agencies were coming under the DHS umbrella, so they were being collected under the DHS umbrella. And then a couple guys from the State Department, right? So we were flying guys up. We were doing hide site location for HRT, which wasn't on site yet. We were identifying those. We had military advisors there. Nobody really could identify who they were at the time.
And this is all for the Olympics?
100%.
In 2002?
And it was a task force. It falls under a task force that comes together for special events, and it's called the NSSE, which I believe is National Security Special Events. Okay. And that usually comes together for foreign dignitaries. If you got like a UK prime minister in town, and he's visiting the president. They want to do all kinds of public.
So they bring in this many agencies.
They did for this because I think everybody on their mind. 9/11 was on everybody's mind
for sure,
and they still felt that something else could touch off.
Yeah.
Although we do know U.S. is probably the safest place post 9/11, right? Conventional thought says that things are probably going to be pretty safe for a little while.
Yeah.
Regardless, it's like playtime for all the agencies and stuff. So we were flying after we did a couple of security overflights. We flew some guys up to the comms towers that wanted to hang some things, from it and do some work inside. And I'm not a tech guy, so I'm just like, sure, flew up there, landed, hung out with the guys for 3 or 4 days. And in the back end of that, they were like, hey, there's a program that we think you'd be great for if you're interested. And then another buddy had told me about it too. Another Marine had told me about it, and I was like, "Yeah, okay, sure." Well, I don't like. And they're like, "Well, you'd be home more, but you'd be downrange part of the time." Got a number to call the phone number. Realized in my my latent wisdom that they were not State Department, although that's often said when you ask somebody from. The CIA, who they're with, it's always State Department.
So we're, at that time when you're prepping everything and you're there working with all these other agents. What was your role and position then?
So essentially, we were just a ferry. We were just a helicopter. Helicopter was on station.
Oh,
We
okay.
were just a helicopter ferry because I had been used to doing search and rescue stuff. So I kind of doubled as kind of an impromptu.
Yeah. So you're just transporting these guys, and so that's all it took, huh?
Right.
Working with them, and you were just getting to know them,
just
networking,
having conversation, just being friendly. Obviously, being there for any needs they have. Hey, you guys want coffee? Do you want a water? Do you want what do you guys think about lunch and stuff like that? Just being super, like I did with anybody. It was just kind of the way I do business. But, they're like, hey, do you think you could qualify for a top secret SCI clearance? And I go, I doubt it, because your mind starts going through all the stuff you've done wrong in your life.
For sure. How far back are they digging?
Yeah, somebody's going to find out something. Stole candy from the 7-Eleven. But, so a year goes by. I don't even, I'm kind of, doing my own thing, just kind of totally forgot about it, and I get a call, and they're like, hey, we need you in North Carolina at the U.S. Training Center in 2 weeks. Your clearance came through. And I was like,
really?
Holy cow. And then the next several weeks, paperwork came through, and my wife's looking at like diplomatic passport paperwork and embassy paperwork in some of these foreign countries that I was in, and she's like, what is
And it's a
going on?
lot. That's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah.
So during this time, I mean, are you pretty excited? I mean, it's not every day you get, I guess, technically recruited by the CIA.
Correct.
In a way, and then now you just get a green light that it's going through. I mean,
I didn't know what to expect, man. I really didn't know what to expect. A lot of the questions that I got later were, as I was, and I had obviously, had plenty of experience with AR-15s, both personally and professionally, Glocks. I had a chance to fire. We did some aerial gunnery work from helos when I was kind of the Vortex side. But they were like, hey, can you hit a tombstone with a 249? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I think so. You know what I mean? And, exposure to other weapon systems that a lot of, and everybody in the program was either, combat Marine, 0311, 0321, or they were former, soft guys. In fact, when I got downrange to the first country, some of the guys one guy was Red Cell, Marchenko's Red Cell.
What's Red Cell?
It was the task force that Dick Marchenko had put together to infiltrate naval bases all over the U.S. and in foreign countries. There were U.S. naval bases to see how impenetrable or non-impenetrable they were.
Really?
Yeah.
That'd be a fun gig.
Extremely fun gig. And at the end of the day, don't knock over anything, Dexter.
Oh, Dex.
Here, oft. Good boy. At the end of the day, I was like, wow, man, these guys are like people I read about. You know?
So you get your clearances, everything goes through. What's the process of getting hired by the CIA? I mean, that's a pretty exciting thing.
Formal.
Okay.
Other than the clearance part, which I kind of knew a little bit about what the clearance took when investigators were visiting my neighbors. I'd get calls from people be like, "Hey, man, there's a guy here asking all kinds of questions about you."
Deep.
Yeah, really deep. And former employers, school, friends, former girlfriends. I was married at the time. I was like, wow, that's hardcore. Is that going to be okay on the mic?
Yeah, it'll be fine. I mean, I'm sure we'll pick it up, but.
And I obviously qualled. You go through attack fam, and you got to be able to manipulate an AK. That's probably loud. Dexter, here.
Dex, we need to get you a quieter toy, pup.
You want to grab that? I'll give him a. Pooey.
Oh, he wants it.
Off.
Poor pup.
Off. There you go. That's your
All
consolation
right, he gets
prize.
a little treat. I got water beside you too if you need any. They're right on the floor right next to you.
It's even labeled.
Oh no, these are I didn't do it in the beginning, but yeah, no, I sent everybody home with a cigar. So this guy, he's a Marine, combat Marine, got out, became a cop in Chicago, got shot in the line of duty. So I try to give small businesses, veteran-owned, law enforcement opportunities to send in things, and that way we could give them the guests. And then the other one, he's a recon Marine. He started Sea State Coffee, so everybody gets going with a bag of coffee and some cold brews and go from there. But yeah. So anyways, back to, so now you're in or you're going through.
Well, and I'm supposed to be read out. I was supposed to be read out in December. Of course, you don't hear anything until it happens, right?
Okay.
And consequently, a friend who I had met in my travels, who used to work for the NSA, but now works for kind of a data collection company that does work for the NSA, which will remain unnamed. He's like, hey, your clearance is with Scattered Castle, which is like a closed network. It's usually like the NSA, CIA.
Okay.
It's like a separate. So when somebody says, hey, I have a TS, I have a top secret clearance, they can't find you because they don't have access to Scattered Castle. Only those agencies that are part of Scattered Castle have access to it. Everybody else is under JPass.
Okay.
Yeah, everybody else is under JPass.
Okay.
DOD, DOJ. And he goes, do you want me to port your clearance to JPass and you'll just have a DOD top secret? And I go, yeah. Because at the time I started my company, Protective Principles, which we'll talk about a little bit, and I wanted to have that clearance so I could have a facility clearance and I could, handle documents, etc. So,
for sure, absolutely.
Yeah. But so I'm trying to see how much I can talk about. And I won't talk about specific locations, but the first destination was Pakistan, and that was an interesting deployment.
So you get in, go through. What was the training like? You talk about training?
It wasn't so much. I mean, we did IED, and it's weird. Depending on your role, right? You go different ways. So I had a medical and search and rescue background, although that was secondary to security, right? To making sure that the client can do all the collection and do everything they want to do. I had to go to courses like live tissue and stuff like that, while other guys got to go to like lock picking and surveillance and stuff.
So they had you already designated, obviously, with what you had as a background, fire rescue, medical, that type of stuff. Yeah. So that's your direction when you got hired by the CIA. 100%. So now you're doing live tissue. Did they do the pig training?
100% porcine model, pig training. Okay. That was really interesting. I did get to go to the farm, which is Camp Erie, and do IED identification and mitigation, which was pretty cool. It was a pretty cool course, and it was pretty intensive. You were never off the clock. Oh, okay. So you could be going to chow, and there's an IED, simulated IED that blows up on the roadside, and you have to, take evasive action. And
really?
Stuff, yeah. So that was I like how immersive that stuff is. It's definitely pretty cool. And then we did all kinds of stuff. We did. We did baton, we did edge weapon training, and just stuff you'd never really thought you'd need, but I guess at some point or another they didn't know what really to expect.
Are you at this point when you're learning these things, you're like, well, why am I...
Well, yeah.
Why am I needing to learn this? Like, what are these guys about to put me into?
It gets more interesting because... Pakistan was really unstable at the time.
For sure.
It still is, but it was considered one of the most unstable regions. And again, I can't go into specifics about the operations or anything like that, but we were never hit. I think there was an understanding that if we just focused on our mission and left everything else we saw alone, that we could remain in place without much interference. However, we were probed a lot because we were, the Pakistani Taliban is one of the most powerful organizations. You know, they run
the
Haqqani network, which is like a global, syndicate of.
They got the funding, so if they have the money, they got the power.
Yeah, and Al Qaeda and Haqqani are very, very tight, and that's unnerving.
So what are you ignoring over there that's going on? So obviously, I mean, you say you can't get up too much. Are you guys there protecting, observing?
Yeah, I can't go into too much detail until I know I'm read out, and then I can pick and choose what I say.
Okay.
I think over there we were really surprised that the government that was facilitating this didn't want us there either.
Really?
Yeah, it's a weird dichotomy.
Okay.
So that being said, there were times that we got squeezed manpower-wise, and like we thought that drawdown was because we were going to get hit and stuff like that.
Almost setting you guys up, making
100%.
you so you're not as strong when
100%. We didn't have a lot of guys on station anyway. It wasn't like there was
you're not running a platoon.
Yeah.
So when they're shrinking you down, I mean, are you going down to single digits? I mean,
low double digit.
Really, that's
numbers.
scary.
And this includes analysts and targeters and all kinds of stuff,
which aren't going to really be in the fight.
Correct.
So when you guys are in Pakistan, I mean, you're turning a blind eye to things. What's going? I mean, are you watching? Are you knowing who's cartel, who's Taliban, and you just, hey, we're here, but
Wild West, brother. Wild West. I remember we were taking a shuttle flight from one location to another and picked up a guy who got on, and you could swear this guy was solid Taliban, and he sits on the plane and looks at all of us, beard, salwar kameez, like the man dress, the whole 9 yards, dirty face and stuff, and I was just like, holy cow. And then he busts out a can of Copenhagen and taps it, and I was like, oh, this guy's an American.
No shit.
And he's like, hey, what's up?
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
It's like, wow, man. I mean, granted, we weren't wearing, camis either. We were, pretty casual, or some guys are wearing, multicam bottoms or whatever. Here.
But you would have put money on it that this dude was straight up Taliban.
Oh yeah. And this is what I mean. Like, you don't know who's friend, who's foe, who's working for the good guys, working for the bad guys. I requested time over at another site in Jabad was my first Afghanistan assignment, and I fell in love with not only the team but the location. We got treated like rock stars. We got the best food, you name it. I got so many stories from over there, but I've got even better stories from another spot in Afghanistan. So I was in Afghanistan at the time when and I was actually on the base when the Bin Laden assassination happened, and we were co-located with Ground Branch, right? So Ground Branch worked in conjunction with Omega, which was a task force, that was comprised of Tier 1 assets and GB, and they would kick doors with the locals and, their special operations guys. And they landed the birds that you saw obviously on Zero Dark 30.
The birds that didn't exist.
And then turned all the lights out. Well, we were sitting in the talk with IR cameras. So they came in and they go, hey, don't turn the IR cameras on the birds. And we're like, cool. And then a couple guys were like, you know what I mean? Like, just cheated over, yeah.
Oh, for sure.
And I just was like, man, this is crazy, but I liked it so much better. But when that went down, the packs were like, everybody out. Everybody get the F out, because it was just kind of it was really kind of an affront to their goodwill, so to speak. So we got booted out of there. A lot of them, and then around that same time is when Hillary pulled all the guys' dip passports. She's like, we're not using State Department cover for any of these guys anymore. You guys are on your own. So Yeah, it was a lot different because guys were coming to our unit from combat operations.
Okay.
And they didn't know what to expect either. And they got off the plane with the hoorah and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And people were like, we don't do that here, man. Like
Different world.
Yeah, it's like a whole different. And guys were like, oh my gosh, like yeah. I mean, I could go down the rabbit hole pretty deep with you, but it was just a very different operation. And we had a lot more latitude than guys were used to. You know, guys are used to having a platoon leader and, commanding officer and stuff. And, we just had a couple of guys who were like, hey, here's your parameters. Here's what we need done. And we expect you guys to do it and use decorum.
So what's the day-to-day out there?
It changes all the time, man. I mean, if somebody were to ask what operations were like, I'm like, watch 13 hours,
Yeah, okay.
Because like it could change day to day. You're a shuttle driver one day driving guys around one day. You're flying in helos the next. You're grabbing an asset or processing an asset. It was a very, very interesting. Wearing a lot of hats is very interesting, and that keeps the boredom at bay. But
I'm sure, because with boredom, I mean, you get complacent, and that's when guys start screwing up.
Complaining. Right, complaining was an art form over there when it was boring.
It really is, and then if it doesn't change, it turns to cancer. That's a big problem with platoons.
Yeah, you know what it's like. I mean,
for sure.
Where were you when you were in Afghan? What parts?
Kabul. I was right at the embassy the whole time. So yeah, yep. And that I mean, that was miserable because the conditions were horrible. We all had dysentery.
Holy cow!
It was because we were working with the
ANA?
No, who were the Gurkhas?
Oh yeah.
And so we're hand in hand with these Gurkhas, and they're coming from Nepal or all over the their region, and so they don't have the best hygiene standards, and then we have Afghanis, the local Afghanis that they had vetted, and they're working chow halls and stuff. I mean, you see it, and we'd watch a guy carry a bowl of fruit, and he'd sneeze straight into the bowl of fruit, and then put it up for breakfast. And we're all sitting there like, no, man. And so, a bunch of us all I lost like 20 pounds immediately.
Did they put you on Cipro?
They didn't put us on anything. I was calling the wife, telling her to send me just packs of tuna and peanut butter and stuff. And I don't know if they're still around, but there was a company called Nuts and More.
I know.
And they had like that high protein peanut butter, different flavors and stuff. She was sending me cases of that. And I was paying my terp to go out in town and give me those chabli kebabs, those that fry, which was
fried bread. Oh man,
dude. So that and a box of dates. That's all I lived off of was peanut butter, dates, some fucked up Afghani meat. It was better than what they were feeding us, and the living conditions are horrible because the Gurkhas they're leaving shower babies everywhere. They're blowing snot rockets. I mean, the mirrors and sinks were covered in just loogie. It was horrible living conditions.
Yeah.
And then they ended up moving my team from. We were just up from the ISAF base. They moved us out in town, and we were living in these villas that I guess at the time it wasn't Blackwater, but Z or Academy, whatever they changed the name to like the third time. It was us. The CIA had a building in our compound. And
that was the Hotel Ariana.
Yeah,
so I spent some time there.
Okay, so that was my last place until I got fired there, but that's where we were staying, and so. The Gurkhas were cool there. I mean, they were cooking breakfast every morning. I mean, those guys were squirted, but when they were down by the ISAF base, like on the main contractor base, that's where it was.
Yeah.
Because they had built those right when we switched over and went to the hotels. They built those big, almost like barracks buildings, and they were all like commingled showers and stuff. And that's where everybody was getting sick.
I remember that. Have you ever been to the Talabar? Have you been to the Talabar? It's like the bar that's kind of down the street from.
No.
That was a big, famous hangout. But we actually, and I wasn't there at the time, but we actually got hit a couple of times at Ariana. They had tried to, infiltrate.
Mm-hmm.
Man, there wasn't a place that I was at that we weren't, constantly being attacked either by mobile ground. Foot mobiles.
What's that like being? I mean, CIA in a small town. I mean, or a small unit. What's your guys' protocol? I mean, when you guys are you on base with other ISAF, military.
Sometimes we're not. It just depends on the location.
Yeah.
You know, PAC was weird. We had for a long time. We had indig weapons.
So you're running AKs and RPKs and
RPG 7s. We had
Dishkas.
Really? With incendiary rounds. And I was like, and we're in the location we were at. We were pretty offset from not too far off from a town. And I was like, I'm not firing incendiary rounds putting them downrange at anybody when there's a town of a couple hundred people right there. And guys would be like, well, of course we are, And I was like, bro, we'll burn that place down to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I remember firing the Dishka a couple of times, and I was thinking, how do people not like taste their own spinal fluid from the overpressure from that thing?
Explain a Dishka for people listening.
It's just like it's like almost like a Ma Deuce, like an M2 on steroids,
mm-hmm.
man. And it fires the same size round,
but it's god awful.
It's horrible, like the 45-degree angle that the
mm-hmm.
blast comes off the muzzle, and man, I don't know. I was just like, man, I don't want to use that thing if I don't have to. And we had to learn how to, which is weird because we had to learn how to take that thing apart until we got mod. We eventually did get American armaments, but heavy weapons and crew served weapons. But until we did, we had to learn how to take that thing apart in the dark and stuff. And I was like, my gosh, man, this is a lot.
I've never disassembled one. Is it compared to a Mod Deuce? Because I was a heavy machine gun instructor, so I loved the Mod Deuce Mark 19 were my babies, and so
timing.
That's why because the dish that shoots at a much faster rate of fire, doesn't it?
It does than the Mod Deuce. There's definitely a difference there, but I don't know. It was so complicated, and I think initially I can't remember at a couple locations it had that. Anti-aircraft setup,
mm-hmm.
and I just was like, I don't.
Were these things on tripods, or did you have mounted in vehicles?
No, they were hard mounted into AN2 matting if it was stationary, and then we had a couple in vehicles that were hard mounted into the bed of these trucks, but we couldn't use military vehicles, so we were using either indig vehicles, or we actually had a couple of Ford F-350 stake trucks.
Oh, that's nice.
Well, it's nice, but we didn't have any AR-500 armor.
Of course not.
Of course not. I was like, what's the point here?
Swiss cheese.
Yeah, so essentially the plan was to butt those vehicles up to some cutout pieces of land and use that as cover while other units bounded. I don't know. It was weird, man. We had a guy show up who was he was a former Ford air control guy.
Okay.
And he was like, okay, this is what you got to do. This is how you got to call for fire. And somebody raised their hand and they go, hey, are we calling for fire from our own guys? He's like, no, you probably indig air. And everybody was like, oh my, like it just changed the narrative completely.
He's teaching you how to call fire from the local military.
The local military, and nobody wanted anything to do with it.
Hell
Like,
no.
I'm not going to take rounds.
No.
I don't know. It was so weird. And then
the fact that you're even talking to
right?
That's sketchy.
We had an E&E plan that somebody scrutinized, and one of the guys looked at it and he goes, we're doing this like mobile? And the guy's like, yeah, we either mobile or on foot. He goes, you realize this is a location of one of the most hardcore tribes in the region. He goes, we'll make it a couple hundred meters before we get cut down.
Because they're watching everything that you're doing.
Yeah, of course they are. Why wouldn't they? It just makes sense to glass people that you don't trust and keep them on,
Are you guys set outside of the town, or are you buried?
No, we were set outside of the town.
So it was easier for them to watch inside
Although
out?
we did blackout conditions. So we were running nods at night as best we could and doing completely blackout conditions. But it was just a strange... Man, it was just a strange way of doing things, and nobody could get their handle on it. And you take guys from so many different units, right? One guy, here's a story for you, man. You'll love this. One guy on paper looked like Alexander the Great, right?
Okay.
He was. I won't talk about his name, but he was 10th group. He was sergeant major. He was a weapons sergeant. He had all kinds of time with all these heavy weapons, and had put time in. And you look at his resume, and you're like, wow, man, that's crazy. And he gets to site, and he's setting up all these defensive positions, and these guys are coming from combat units, And they're like, and guys are like, what are you doing, man? There's no like, interlocking fields of fire. Like, this guy just started rubbing people the wrong way, but he was the battle captain for the unit.
So he's coming from military mindset, not free agency.
Well,
how you guys are rolling. You guys are playing on a completely different game.
I mean, like I said, like on paper, he looked like Captain America.
Yeah.
He looked like amazing. And then guys realized that this guy probably didn't play nice with others, and he was on loan to the Air Force, training the Air Force guys, heavy weapons usage. And at one point, we were doing chalk rounds on the thumpers. We had some thumpers, we had some HK-69s. HK-69s were used more in the Afghan theater.
Okay.
At the time, and so he loads a chalk round. He sees the maintenance guys walking on the airstrip, and he loads a chalk round and fires it at one of the maintenance guys that he's buddies with.
You could kill somebody with a chalk round.
100%. It would have taken his head clean off.
I mean, does he not realize the steel plate that goes in there?
Yeah, and that was the last straw for people. Like, everybody collectively was like, we're not dealing with this guy anymore. And so they kicked him out of the country, and
that's embarrassing.
It was extremely embarrassing. And then he gets hired by a major, well-known firing range to be an instructor with people like Michael Vickers, and do you know what I mean? Like, guys that have like a history with training elite.
Yeah. And this guy gets picked up.
This guy gets picked up because, again, they look at his
paper.
resume.
Yeah, the paper says it all.
Yeah, they don't get a peer review. They don't get anything, and it was just a huge surprise. So.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. So is that how it works over there for you guys? You guys can just peer people out in a way?
It took a while to get that moving.
Okay.
I think that a lot of it was stovepiped. Because like they figured, this guy's got a security clearance that costs $250,000 to procure. He did time with an elite unit most of the time, so he's immediately they assume you're squared away. You pass.
So they want before they pull the plug because he's got millions of dollars dumped into him to probably get to that point. They want to make sure it's enough.
100%.
Yeah, that's hilarious that he didn't know. I mean, even if you're screwing around with a buddy. People that don't know, a chalk, what he's talking about, what Drew's talking about is technically a 203 round, and it's just, it's got a blue cap on it, and it's full of, we call it Cheeto dust or this orange chalk, but there's a thick steel plate, so when that grenade round hits, that steel plate crushes the tip of your round and explodes chalk everywhere to mark. And and those things are cruising. Yeah. I mean.
Yeah. It takes a while for that to arm, like when they're, the golden eggs, the HEDP.
Yeah.
It takes a while for it to arm, but you're still dealing with that steel plate. You're still dealing with a projectile.
That's hauling ass.
Terminal velocity.
That's bigger than a golf ball that's going to hit your ass. That's wild.
Yeah. It just was, like, I'm sure from contracting, Afghanistan and stuff, it was a little bit like the Wild West, but it was big boy rules.
Mm-hmm.
You expected guys to be their best and help others and put the work in and stuff. We were very SEAL heavy when I first got there, and you could tell, man. They ordered hair products and stuff like that. A lot of guys from the teams. And then it slowly became Team Marine because I think the client realized that you get a lot of hard work out of Marines. You can depend on them. They don't complain, as much as other units do. And so we got a lot of guys that were eventually MARSOC, but a lot of guys that were, recon, force recon, some 0311s that had, from some units like the regimental combat teams that were, kicking ass down range and stuff. So
I think Marines are the best hands down people you can ever employ. Because you're treated like absolute dog shit. You're giving unrealistic expectations and missions to accomplish with absolute dog shit gear, and they make it happen every single time. No matter how shitty the conditions are, it could always be worse. And so I was actually just having this conversation with a guy on New Year's. He hires a lot. He works in the security world and does some cool guy shit. And he comes up, we were bullshit. He's like, who the worst employees that I have are? And I was like, who's that? He's like, Navy SEALs. Yeah. And I started laughing because I've said it for years because I've hired a lot. And when I had my security company, I had 155 employees at my max. So I had a lot of guys from all over, from Rangers to SEALs. And I agree. I was like 100%. And I know I'm going to get shit for this, but the SEALs are great at here's your mission, go. They have all the tools, all the intel in the world. They conduct a mission and come back. And then that's it. But then you take a Marine unit. And, I mean, you have some Lance Corporal that's dumped in the middle of some city, and he's given a fire team and a map, and they're told to make it happen. And this kid the leadership skills are so much different between, I would say, an 0311 Marine Corps grunt, I would take all day when it came to leading and building over some special ops guy. Because, yes, cool, they could conduct a mission, and they're great at it. They're very intelligent, but that's how their minds are built. When you take a grunt, it's like, here's this mountain, here's your platoon, fucking attack and figure it out. And that's just like the Marine mindset. So when it comes to work, hands down, I'd hire 1,000 Marines all day.
Yep.
And because you just know. And then when the work sucks, it's like, hey guys, this shit sucks. We got to get it done. Fuck, roger that.
Yeah. And it did happen. Hey, stringing concertina wire, you name
for
it,
days, all night. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's hilarious. I was just in Coeur d'Alene yesterday with a buddy of mine. We were talking. We took over a city, outside of a city. We bermed it off. And we called it an anthill, and it was like this 100-foot just hill in the middle of the desert. And our command was like, we need to build an outpost on it. We had to drag all the HESCOs up there to build a whole entire shack on the top of this thing. And then
Do you guys hand fill it?
Hand filled it. We dug the hole so deep on the backside of the hill. If you stepped out of the back at night and weren't paying attention, you fell. Yeah. You're fucking done. Like there was that. But we would patrol all day, search vehicles all day. As soon as it got dark, half the team was stringing concertina wire for a week around our fob. It was just our vehicles pretty much in a wagon wheel outside of the city. So we built concertina wire, 3 strands, the 2 on the bottom, 1 on the top, and the other half were filling sandbags all night, just filling sandbags and walking them up. I mean, and that was it. You wouldn't say a word about it. It was
One of the most hilarious stories was a guy that I had deployed with a couple of times. I think he was from 9th Marines, dog handler. And he was telling me that when they took over Ramadi, the Marines took over Ramadi from the Army, they would foot patrol it, and they'd ask the Army, they're like, hey, tell us about what you got going. They're like, I don't know, we just load up in the Bradleys and drive from one side of the road through the town to the other. And then get shot the whole time. Yep. So the Marines are going,
house to
house to clear it out. And I was like, holy cow. He was telling me that it was probably one of the most ridiculous deployments he had. I mean, he was just thinking he for sure wasn't coming home.
Mm-hmm. Ramadi, we did Ramadi. We were on the outside of it, but our other half of the unit took through Ramadi. I believe they split it with the Army, and for Operation Steel Curtain. And I mean, those guys, you rolled through afterward. I mean, there wasn't a single building that didn't have a bullet hole in it. That city was turned to Swiss cheese in the matter of days, and it was pretty incredible to watch and see all that go down. But goddamn, like this, you could just tell the difference, when Marines would roll up. I mean, you hear the stories about how Marines are replacing Army units, and you'd pull up to this Army unit and fucking caged every day. And then as soon as they hear Marines roll in, I mean, it was quiet.
Yeah,
and they knew.
I think the rumors were. Yeah, circulating.
And I think if they, obviously with the president at the time and all that shit, and you take Afghan, if they would have just taken the leashes off, you put every top Marine unit, grunt unit that has all the war fighters, and they would have turned them loose in Afghan or Iraq. Fuck, dude. I think it would have been a much different outcome.
Yeah, I think the way that I figured out how the war was somewhat unwinnable was the fact that, that Al-Qaeda was really direct in saying, hey, we're very patient. And we're still dealing with it today, obviously.
They've been dealing with it for thousands of years.
Yeah.
They got the waiting game dialed.
They do. And they're going to plan to outlive a lot of the societies because they're procreating at a rate that the Western nations are not.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell the way the immigration's stacking up in Europe that it's going to be a whole different world for our kids. than it is for us right now, for sure, even though we can kind of see that tipping point.
It's interesting. And we don't see it enough on the news here about what's going on over there, about the amounts of Muslims taking over these countries. I mean, it's sad. You see some of these communities and everybody's been driven out.
UK, man. I just was, we were in the UK in 2017. I was there with my kids. We were visiting relatives and hanging out and stuff. And it was still, a pretty nice area, and the streets didn't look how they do now. And, you got lots of Sikhs and lots of, different immigrants, but not on the level. You don't have immigration on the level it is now. And it's just a whole different world. And I work with a para here, a guy that was a British para who actually did security for the royal family in Saudi. Okay. And he won't go home anymore. He won't go back to the UK, even though he's got relatives there and, brothers and cousins and stuff like that. He won't go back.
It's sad. It's even happening. Where's the great Mall of America?
Was it Minnesota?
What city?
Anyway, is it Dearborn? No, it's not Dearborn.
No. Anyway, you look at it there.
Yeah.
It's completely converted now. It looks like you're in downtown Fallujah.
Yeah.
With the slums and the trash. And
I mean, we could get into that because when the stuff went down with these terrorism attacks in the last couple of weeks, I got on the horn with, I still stay in touch with a lot of guys that were that are out. You probably know some of these names, and write some of these down because these would be good guys to have on. Andrew Bustamante is former case officer. Mike Baker, he's a local guy and still does a lot of work, I think, indirectly for the agency, and then does other stuff. He's got a bunch of shows on Discovery Channel.
He's local
Files.
here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mike Baker's a great guy.
Man. You're saying the name, and I feel like I know.
Well, he's been on Rogan.
Yeah.
Eight
okay.
times.
Maybe that's where
7,
I know
8
from.
Times.
Okay.
And then obviously Doug Pattison, which is another case officer that came out of the Iraq, Afghanistan theater. Yeah. These are guys that I talk to on a semi-regular basis. They're all doing, kind of like I am, doing piecemeal work, some consulting here, some advising here, some facilitation of sales there. But they had some opinions, and it's funny, a lot of it came true. The Sam guy that was on, that appered on Ryan's show, it didn't sit right with me, and that's the first thing I did is get on the phone with these guys, and they were like, yeah, that doesn't sound right. They got picked apart.
There's some really weird shit going on. So you want to dump into this?
Well, we can get there.
Give your thoughts at least. I mean, I don't want to get ahead. I feel like we skipped so much.
Well, let me go back because I got a couple of good stories that you can really
I want to hear all this. These,
and I'll make them interesting for you because they were funny. We got deployed to a base in Western Afghanistan, which unfortunately was along the Iranian border, which was under a lot of surveillance at the time from the U.S. because they were worried about nuke production and stuff like that. So one of the things that at the time that we were getting done was resupply from contractors, and they didn't care who the contractors were as long as the materials were not sensitive. Okay. So one of the aircraft coming in at the time was a bunch of Russian contractors, if you can believe that, into Western Afghanistan at an airstrip that we were meeting them, predisposed to meet them at. Pretty unremarkable airstrip. Yeah.
What made it that
no support? There wasn't a U.S. Air Force presence there.
So this is just a strip.
Yeah, it's just a strip.
Okay.
And this Antonov came in at night, early in the morning, but still pre sunrise, and we were waiting for this thing to come in with some supplies, like I said, that were unremarkable, and so this thing comes in. And it lands and shears off the landing gear on landing. It's an Antonov 7 Victor, which is an old Soviet era bomber, medium bomber. Okay. With all the munitions and everything stripped out of it, and starts on fire on the airstrip. So the belly starts on fire, skids to a stop, and we don't have anything to do any kind of search. They're looking at me, and I'm like, I'm not going in there with a fire extinguisher.
You guys are just sitting here waiting, and this plane comes in and just crashes.
Yeah, and everybody's looking at it like, well, these guys are dead, and there goes all our stuff, right? And a few minutes go by, and somebody's like, look, and somebody's kicking out the nose cone, because they got those nose cones where they put the, the guns in. And somebody's kicking out the nose cone, and one by one, these guys, these Russians in coveralls, jump out of this nose cone. One guy's still on fire, like batting it out. You know what I mean? These guys are walking over towards us, casually walking, not running like you would think, you'd do if you were
another day at the office. Yeah,
another day at the office, and they're just walking over, and as they're putting the fire out in their coveralls, and one guy's carrying a bottle of vodka. And they're speaking Russian to us, and the one guy hands a bottle of vodka like we're gonna partake, and we're like, no, man, what the fuck is going on? Like, I couldn't believe this, dude.
They're all just tore up,
and they just look back in their aircraft, and they're like, and then they're just, I don't speak a lick of Russian, but man, it was the most hilarious. It burned in my mind.
Oh, for sure.
As a memory.
For sure. Yeah. You guys lost everything on that plane that you were supposed to. And the whole thing just burned.
We were there because we had to be. We were there for the next couple of days when they took pieces of the fuselage and brought it to a boneyard over at the airbase, the Shindan Air Base, which is close by, and just left it there, to rot. So we had to go check on it, go through it, make sure there was nothing sensitive in there that, would get picked apart by the locals, stuff like that. So it was just insane.
Leave it to the Russians.
Oh, I know, right?
That sounds like, if you would just explain that story, be like, who do you think was flying it? Russians.
Not a care in the world.
None.
Not a care in the world.
None.
And then my last deployment actually was in JBAD, and we were, obviously working in some fashion with the Afghan Special Operations guys. They'd train, they'd run that road that it's kind of a big oval, like almost like a racetrack around Fenty. They call it Fob Fenty, but we stayed in one side of the compound, and then next to us was the parade grounds and kind of the Afghan Special Operations side. Yeah. And then across the way was, like, I think the Drew Coussens, and then there was First Group over on the other side, and then a variety of other branches, Air Force, Marines, what have you. And we were, I think, going to be headed over in that area, and a C-130, and you can look it up, I think it was Torque 62, was idling on the ground, loading JSOC contractors and JSOC equipment on board to take off, I believe, to demobilize those guys. Okay. And they had put a NODS case, pitch black, because they're flying in pitch black because they're afraid to get hit, right? So they'd corkscrew in. Yep. And they put a NODS case, one of the pilots did, under one of the flap controls. And I'm not a pilot, so I don't know specifically which control or which flap. Okay. But you couldn't see it because they're all under nods and they have blackout conditions in the cockpit. So they load these guys on. I think we were headed in that general direction about 4:35 in the morning or so. So 4:30, 0500. And these guys load up. Their load master, gives the thumbs up, and they begin to take off. And because that flap is impeded by the NODS case, the aircraft gets lift full of fuel and starts to yaw to the right and goes nose down right into the parade grounds, which is, from us, is only a couple 100 meters away. And the fireball, I mean, you could feel it, the fireball.
And this is full of Americans on it?
Well, full of Americans, correct. And as it noses in, kills everybody on board, and then splashes JPH, splashes jet fuel all over all the Afghans that were mustering in the parade grounds. No. So we start heading over there, and it's like a cartoon, man. I see guys completely on fire, running across, like just coated in JP8, like burning fuel, running across the parade grounds. One of the guys, I saw him just hauling, and then we realized later he's running for the showers because that's the direction he was going. This guy lives 16 hours longer, complete, like 90% third degree, you know what I mean? Just a crispy critter. And I was like, what is going on? And that was like the last memory of any deployment I had taken, of seeing all this happen. And like there's aircraft parts everywhere. It was just insane.
So these dudes are standing in formation or just
They're
mustered up,
starting to. They're starting to muster.
and this plane crashes right and just splashes them with
100%. All the guards in the towers got partial burns. And
how many people died in this incident?
Well, I think it was 3 or 4 JSOC contractors. Okay. It was the air crew, which on a C-130, I believe was what, 5, 6, 5?
It's a decent. It's at least I'd say 4 or 5.
Yeah, and then I think at least probably maybe less than a dozen. So somewhere between half a dozen and a dozen Afghans. And I was just, the memory from that is weird. I came home. And because we were back from deployment to my front door in 24 hours because we chartered. So we didn't garrison. There was none of that. It was like literally back there. And I remember seeing my wife hadn't raked the leaves. You know, it was fall. And I told her, I go, bring the kids inside. And I remember I was so full of like, I don't even know that I was throwing stuff around my garage, like into the sheetrock, and like I was screaming out there, and I can't even begin to tell you like how weird of a transition it was. And then I had to go get cereal.
There's no transition.
Yeah. And then I had to go get cereal for my kids, and I'm like standing in the cereal aisle at Albertsons, like looking at all the food, and we ate, like a small variety of stuff, just going, oh my gosh, I can't process this. So, just a really, really weird last deployment memory.
Wow, that quick.
I transitioned out. Yeah,
that quick.
Yeah, and then they just like, oh, okay, and
have a nice life.
See ya.
Isn't it weird how the government does that to us? I mean, I'm categorizing you as military. You know how, but you take these guys, and they're dealing with that. They're, and I have a perfect example of a vet we worked with. He's a very good friend of mine now. And his best friend got shot and died in his arms. And the next day, he's literally on a flight back to the U.S., and he says he's on this flight, and he's looking at his fingernails, and they're just coated. Mm-hmm. He's digging his best friend's blood out of his fingernails. Yeah, and then he lands, and he's back home within 24 hours, and his buddies are like, you want to play Xbox? And, we wonder why there's so many issues of these guys and watching a bunch of people burn or dealing with kids, and then you get back and the government's just, have a nice life, thanks for your service, and here's society.
Yeah,
good luck.
In garrison, they don't do anything for you.
No, absolutely not.
You go back to picking up trash, and it doesn't make much sense, and the stories just abound. I know Mission 43 has got a program that's really remarkable.
Yeah, they do some pretty incredible things here.
Some buddies of mine, guys that I work out with at the gym, one guy was a sapper, one guy was an 11 Bravo, have taken that program that they offer there, and it's like an immersive 30-day program, and they said it's worked.
Good.
It's worked miracles.
Yeah,
sure.
I know a lot of vets that have utilized them. They do some, now that they have that facility, I mean, they're probably stepped it up even more.
Oh yeah, it's gorgeous. Have you been in there?
I haven't yet.
Oh,
no.
It's gorgeous, man. You got to go check it out.
Yeah, I need to, and so, but it fascinates me of how, and then they wonder why so many dudes are getting on the bottle or the pills and end up down these dark roads.
The VA isn't what it's supposed to be, man.
And then you look at Ukraine and how much money we're dumping into that, and we have homeless veterans. We have veterans that can't even get their prosthetics fit because they're 8 months out because they live in bumfuck nowhere, and their VA is absolute garbage in their state. And, like that's the frustrating stuff. And then you see these guys, like my wife, I was actually on a meeting, and I have like this weekly psychology, or I guess she's a shrink, whatever, it's therapy meeting. It's a group therapy. And my wife, she logged in for me because I think I was either doing a podcast where I was in a meeting, and she just logs in just so I don't miss a thing, and she listened to it, and when I came downstairs, she was like, I understand why motherfuckers are killing themselves. She's like, the fact she's in just listening to this VA rep. Okay, we're gonna talk about our inner feelings today. Yeah. What dude wants to sit and listen to this shit?
No. We had a psychologist come over to JBAT, and I mean, here's a bunch of guys from like Ground Branch, man, that have operated for 20 plus years. and she was telling us how to breathe, like you know, how to do breathing exercises, and guys are like, but it was mandatory, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
I get there's going to be guys that utilize it. I sit in that stupid ass phone call every week, and there's a guy in there, and he's all super engaged, has a million points to talk about, and then there's the whole rest of the class. You can tell these dudes are just fucking kill me, man. Get me out of here. Like I'm here because the VA makes me sign into this bullshit. And so I think if we put that money that we're putting into other countries and put it in the different programs or put it in the organizations that are actually making a difference, you know?
Yeah.
But at the same time, how long are we going to go through this?
I don't know. And I experience it on a regular basis with guys that are still dealing with the after effects. You know,
sure.
I did EMDR. One of the guys I deployed with to PAC was a former Ranger, and interesting story. They were slugging it out with Haqqani, and they weren't sure if they were over the border or not in Kunar province area, and ran out of ammo, and ended up, like, some of it went hand to hand. And then he was majorly screwed up, and nobody really detected it until it was too late, and came home, got in trouble with the law, lost his wife, lost his kids to divorce and child custody battles. And I lost track of him for a while, and I was like, John, I'd reach out, John, what are you doing? John, are you okay? And stuff. So I figured he was in prison.
Yeah.
And gets a hold of me later, and he goes, man, you're not going to believe what I'm doing now. And I go, I was expecting the worst, And he goes, I'm a psychologist at the VA. And I go, you're kidding me, dude.
You're like, you?
Yeah, well, exactly. Right?
Yeah.
And
But you're not trying to be
I go,
mean. But
I go, tell me how you got there. And he goes, man, I was facing all kinds of legal ramifications and stuff. And he goes, and I took, the bull by the horns, and I went and got 4 treatments of ketamine therapy.
Really?
Like invasive ketamine therapy. And he goes, and I could tell by the way he was talking to me, he was a different guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, man, I got to try that. So I tried that. I tried EMDR.
How is ketamine? Okay, so
ketamine therapy is cool because you don't have to relive your experiences. It's like your brain kind of works around those trauma centers, builds new neural pathways on its own.
Okay.
From however the drug works. Ketamine, I would imagine, is probably a lot like ayahuasca.
Okay.
Or DMT. It's got some of the same properties, or psilocybin on a larger scale. The thing I didn't like about EMDR is I had to unpack every memory, and then I had to hold the paddles and go through all that crap, and that was just awful.
That's kind of the same with ayahuasca. I mean, you're facing all your demons and stuff, which a lot of guys want to do, and I'm fascinated with this because working with vets over a decade now, I've seen what works, what doesn't work, and I feel very few when it comes to talking to a shrink. Just from my personal experience, it's seeing the outcome. It's not a lot. The guys that are like, oh man, my therapist really got me through it. There's a good amount of them, but the guys that we're working with that have survivor's remorse, that watched buddies get killed, had to do things like that.
Right.
That shit, the majority of them are like, absolutely not.
Right.
But then I've been seeing the last few years, a lot of these guys are more going to these treatment centers, and they're coming back.
Private treatment centers.
Yes, private treatment centers.
Which is interesting because you think the funding will be there. Maybe it will be with the new administration.
Hopefully.
He's always kind of dedicated, to, his time to changing the paradigm a little bit. But man, private treatment centers, it's just, it shouldn't have to be like that.
No. Imagine I can go to the VA. And I don't know if I've talked about it on the podcast or not before, but I went in just to do like my initial check-in. Cool, this is what's up. You talk to all these different doctors. You sleep? No, I do this whole thing. And so I see the last doctor of the day, and they're like, cool, stop by the pharmacy on the way out. We'll get you what you need, and you'll be on your way. And I'm like, cool. So I pull my little number, give my ID, sit there for a few minutes. They call me up, and this woman puts this giant paper bag on the counter, like, pfft. And I'm looking at this bag, I'm like, God damn, what the hell is in this? Pulls out a second one, puts it up there. She's like, okay, this is everything that's been prescribed to you today. And I'm exactly, that's the exact look on my face. I'm like, looking at this, so I grab these 2, not grocery bags, but they're not lunch bags. They're
medium, yeah.
They're a decent paper bag. They're all folded. Got my little staple in it and my receipt thing on it. And I'm walking my truck like, what in the fuck is in this that I need to take? So I throw them in the truck, get home. I walk in the house, and the wife's like, no, give me it all.
Yeah, flush it.
She goes through them, and she's like, nope. We're reading the side effects of these things. May cause suicidal thoughts and tendencies, lack of sleep. And then, I need to take this pill because this pill is giving me these side effects. So I have to take another pill to counter the second side effects. It was mind-blowing, but here we are, and you have vets. Why can't we prescribe them edibles? Why can't you just get a block of pre-rolled joints delivered to your door every month or every whatever year it is? They have no problem sending me the biggest jar of pills of narcotics on the planet, no questions asked. But I can't get a jar of edibles sent to me.
Western medicine, man.
It's
just a racket.
Because they know it works. Yeah. And I work with these vets that horrible nightmares, no sleep. I have one vet that was a partial paraplegic, like almost completely severed his spinal cord, but it didn't. It was just enough. They had this dude on 15 different pills for breakfast. I'll never forget this. I walk in this guy's room to wake him up, make sure he's up. We're on a hunting trip. I walk in his room, and he's got 15 pills bottles all lined up with the lids in front of him, and each lid had 2 to 3 pills in it. And I look at this guy, and I'm like, bro, what the hell? And he's like, Breakfast of Champions, and he just starts taking them. Man. This guy started getting down a rabbit hole, went completely detoxed himself, and started hitting a weed pen. And he's like, this is all I need. This. Smoke a joint. And that's
probably get in trouble for it in some states too.
100%. And he's like, dude, now I got to go find like a drug dealer behind a dumpster behind Chili's at night. And he's like getting this or the VA. And he literally shows me he has a plastic tote of just pills. It's like, you need anything here? This is what the VA will give me, but I'll go to jail if I actually use something that helps me and that kills the pain in my back, that helps me sleep at night, all from a flower or a leaf, whatever they want to use and extract. But here we are in 2025, and they're just shoving pills down dudes' throats. So to get into the medical treatment, this is why I'm fascinated. I actually had an Air Force vet. She came on. She's big into this stuff. So yeah, I would like to hear your experience, if you don't mind sharing, about this, because there's a lot of curiosity. I think Joe Rogan kind of put it on the map. Right. He started talking about stuff that kind of sparked a lot of people's interest. I'm obviously being in the veteran community. I hear these stories, guys going on all these different trips. So I would love to hear your experience and how it helped.
So unfortunately for me, what stopped my deployments, because I guarantee I'd probably still be deployed today somewhere if God didn't kind of step in and turn tragedy to victory. But so I lost my wife in 2016. She dealt with depression and alcoholism, and I was home getting ready for my 21st deployment. Now, deployments are shorter, but I was leaving in 3 days, and she ended up taking her life in our home.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that she couldn't figure out where I was at. I was angry all the time. I was dealing with my own stuff, and I didn't have time really for her. I couldn't pour attention on her when I'm not whole myself. And that kind of shut everything down right there. I did end up, when my kids got older, I did end up going to a couple deployments to Africa for the client, and then was asked to go to Honduras, and that was the story I told you where I didn't want to take the COVID shot to fly a DOD C-130, but it didn't matter because Ukraine had kicked off, and I definitely didn't feel like going to Ukraine and being a casualty there. So I started looking for my own remedies, talking to a lot of guys that had, like I said, that had done EMDR or had done ketamine, ayahuasca. I know I was definitely doing psilocybin in a microdose fashion for a while, which did help, actually. But one thing that I did is I knew I needed to kind of like continue mission, which is like obviously a big thing with guys in the Corps and stuff like that, is that I needed to find a new fight, here domestically at least. So for me, that involved initially writing an autobiography, which got so redacted by the Publications Review Board at the agency that it wasn't even readable, which is a whole nother mountain to climb. And that's why I wrote fiction. So that's why I wrote A Failed State, and wrote my first fiction novel as a means of therapy.
And so your fiction story, that was kind of the go around to be able to write. Yeah. To write some things that you've experienced in your life, not you, but somebody else.
Hey, they approved it. So, I mean, the cool thing is I was able to take my character in the book, which is Drew Coussens is the name of the main character, and I got to have a lot of creative autonomy there.
Okay.
So.
He's good.
I just don't want him to bump into that camera.
That's hilarious. I wish you could get them on.
That means he's comfortable.
I can see it, kind of.
That's hilarious.
And I had other guys that were dealing with so much crap. One guy, I won't tell his real name, but call sign was Rocket. Rocket came home early because he had an abscessed tooth or something, and they don't screw around with dental stuff because it could go systemic, and guys could deal with a lot of problems. So he goes home early, decides to surprise his wife. And there's elements of this in the book, walks in and hears another voice in his bedroom and realizes that his wife is in bed with another guy.
Oh, God.
And he, they get into an argument. His daughter is just in the room down the hall. The cops show up because of it, and the first thing the cops always do is separate the two people. And he goes to a motel, stays the night. And this is in the book too. And by the time he gets back to talk to her in the morning and work things out, she's got a protection order. And they're like, you need to come to court in 6 months for this protection order. You're not allowed on the premises. You're not allowed to see your daughter, your wife, any of that stuff. And he's like, and finds out that she used his job as means to. He's like, oh, he's a killer. He's got all kinds of guns in the house and stuff. He's like, that's what I do for a living.
Yeah.
And I infused that in the book because it made the character so rich and stuff, and it was true.
Yeah.
And I just feel like I needed to tell that story, because other guys are like, man, I'm not alone in this. I've experienced something similar.
A lot.
And when I wrote the book, it was from a hybrid publisher. It got picked up right away on a few podcasts. SHOT Show was a couple months away. And then right before, like 6 weeks before SHOT Show, Mike Baker mentions it on Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
His first podcast with Joe Rogan. He's like, hey, they were talking about a couple books, and he mentioned mine, had a copy of it there, gave it to Joe Rogan, and of course it gets listed on the Joe Rogan recommended reading list, and it just takes off on Amazon. It just
good for you.
Yeah,
good for you. And you got into that as a form of therapy.
I did. It was purely therapy. I wasn't going to publish it, but then somebody's like, oh, you got to get that story out there because it's going to benefit someone. And then go to SHOT Show, have a book signing at the Eberly stock booth, and sell a whole bunch of copies there, and get to have a couple of guys, including Lamb. Lamb is former SIF guy.
I'm sure if I saw his face.
Did support work for Delta, and then the most famous guy, the MMA guy, Green Beret MMA, Tim
Kennedy.
Tim Kennedy plugged it too.
He's in a lot of shit right now.
A lot of shit. Well, this is what happens when your stories, somebody else's stories, become your stories. And I know that happens in the military a lot. I was with a guy last night who said, look, I'm not going to fault a guy for like gravitating. It happens all the time where like somebody's like, that was me that did that. You were there, but that was me. Because guys just misremember, and they end up, just the amalgamation of stories being told over the kitchen table, the bar top, or something like that. Man, I don't know. You can probably give me your own take on it, but Tim's probably taken it to a new level. But God bless him, man. He's probably never really dealt with a lot of stuff he's seen and done.
He hasn't had to, but now it's crazy. Been watching the SF community just completely unravel lately. I mean, it's been It's been quite the show sitting back as just a Marine watching all these guys, and now they're almost going cannibalistic on each other. Nobody's standing up for him. But I understand. I get why they're crucifying Tim over everything. I've called it for years. Like the first time I ever met that dude was at SHOT Show. Mm-hmm. I was walking down a hallway and he came up and we were kind of crossing paths and he's like, "Hey," and I'm like, "Yeah." Like I was just walking by him. Yeah. He's like, "You want an autograph?" And I thought he was talking to this random guy behind me, and I looked back and the guy looked at me and I looked at Tim and I was like, "I'm good." Like. He's like, "Okay," it just walks right by me, and this random guy that was walking with me, he was like, "What the fuck was that?" I'm like, "I don't even know. Like, I thought he was talking to you." He's like, "I thought he was talking to you." But, that was my first run-in with him. But I don't know. Some of the stories, like him talking about the Afghan pullout and saving hundreds of thousands of people. And
so one of my team leads was there.
Yeah.
And this guy, he's in my book as Loki. His call sign is still Loki, believe it or not. Austin is his first name. Former second bat Ranger.
Okay.
And he has done so many contract deployments he was with Scorpion, the NSA Scorpion contract, would come back to the CIA, mm-hmm. leave again, and now he's in Ukraine. And I was supposed to, this is a whole nother story, but I wrote an article about this it was called the the Decentralized Con Op, and I wrote it for Recoil magazine.
Okay. Because
at the time I had another buddy named Byron who was recruited by the guys that were doing the Venezuelan Maduro operation. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember that. Mm-hmm. And that recruitment was done at the Circle Bar.
At SHOT Show?
At SHOT Show.
No shit.
I'm like, if you'd want, who's going to recruit a bunch of mercenaries for a hit job or a snatch and grab at a Circle Bar in SHOT Show?
I mean, where else are you getting that many caliber of humans in one area at a time?
I don't know.
Every swinging dick that
100%.
thinks that they're anything goes to SHOT Show.
So then right after that, of course, shortly after that's when Kabul fell, and I started getting a bunch of phone calls from guys I deployed with. And they're like, "Hey, let's put a team together. We can, because I knew the landscape well, and we had a lot of assets on the ground that we never heard from after that. The guys that were, either Afghan SOF or that worked for NDS, which is their version of the CIA over there.
Oh, those dudes are gone now.
Oh, I know. And he's like, "Hey, let's put a team together." And we were working along with GSMSG about getting aircraft, a 737 on the ground in there on our own. We were going to be linked up with what became Pineapple, and Loki was like, he goes, I'm going no matter what. And then he calls me later. He's like, "Hey, I need you at Dulles Airport on this day at this time. We got a private jet. It's privately funded.
Bring your kit."
Bring your kit. Yeah. And I was like, "Okay, I'm in," because I was still addicted to the lifestyle then. Even though I had been out for a while.
It calls you back.
Yeah, and I got COVID.
Really?
And I tried to get a hold of him a couple of times, like, I can't make it. So he comes back, and he tells me that first of all, Tim Kennedy was being, facetious about a lot of the details, and was kind of annoying guys on the team because he was loosely part of that organization for whatever time frame. And on top of that, the State Department visited a lot of these guys because they had put children on their aircraft.
Yeah.
So, like, either you shut the fuck up about this or we're going to charge all you guys with child trafficking. And he was like, done.
No shit. Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter what your virtue is or what your intentions are. If you do something without involving the State Department, and just do it privately like they were doing, you could get in a whole lot of trouble. And on top of that, I think whether Tim mentioned this or not, it does a disservice because a lot of guys lost their lives
for sure
over there doing this privately for no money because they wanted to. And I get it, but my connection to that was palpable. So I wrote the article because at one point I'm talking to a guy who's doing, he's got his own talk set up in DC, and he's on the phone, on sat phones, Thule sat phones with guys Thriasat phones with guys downrange, trying to get locations for some of these guys to kind of centralize them to get them out and stuff. And I was like, this is insane that this is not being done, collectively. And
a lot of private.
Yeah.
A lot of guys just wanted to help.
Yeah.
And they needed it. I mean, you look at what we were going through with military-wise.
100%.
We couldn't count on Biden or anybody from the State Department.
The administration was really good at selling everybody out, for sure, on that one.
Yeah.
And the State Department actually credited themselves with a lot of what Pineapple had done, putting Afghans on aircraft. But a lot of them were unvetted too, and we might be dealing with after effects from that right now.
We're 100% going to be, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't know. They were just snatching and grabbing. I mean, they were already throwing people out of helicopters when they were still extracting.
Right.
What's crazy to me is, it was weeks prior to the pullout of Afghan. I probably still got it on my Facebook messages. I still had buddies out, I was on contract with over there. They're like, dude, we're burning everything. I'm like, what do you mean? And they had pits that they did on the base. They dug these giant pits, and this was weeks prior to the announcement. So they already knew that they were pulling out, and they were just loading filing cabinets. They were taking everything out of the embassy, all offices. They were just putting them in trucks, and they were dumping these trucks and just throwing tanks of diesel and incendiary grenades. And they were just, this was a good month, I would say, prior to even hitting the news that we're pulling from Afghan. They were already burning, and they were incinerating.
So you were Kabul. I spent a lot of time in Kabul myself, and then I was at Bagram. I was like, why didn't they use Bagram for, for a...
You would think, why couldn't you just shift those people right there?
Yeah. I haven't been on the ground in Kabul, especially at the Kabul Air Center a couple of times. I was just like, this is the worst place imaginable.
Yeah, hole. Because then you have, Masood Circle, or was it Gray? What did they call that other round? There was a giant roundabout. Masood Circle was right outside the embassy, the front gate of the embassy. Then there was that giant roundabout right by the airport, and that's where we'd have dudes come up and just...
Yep.
You'd be sitting in a Land Cruiser or whatever, and some dude would walk up, take your picture.
Yeah,
and you're
I'm trying to remember the route to Ariana, because we took that so many times from Kabul Air Center. But
that place was a shithole, man. You couldn't get in or out of there. And the traffic was just all day, every day.
There was a couple guys that were headed from the hotel to the air center. I remember where the gal had pulled up with a burqa on a one of those little mini bike, one of those little scooters. Motorized scooters they have, and then ended up punching a V-bid right next to a bus full of American engineers, because she looked in the window and saw a bunch of white faces and just and took out a whole bunch of those, because it wasn't an up-armored.
Yeah,
it was just a shuttle.
Yep.
And that was just a nut.
That place is definitely the Wild West.
Yeah,
it was interesting.
So a couple of SHOT shows in. Circle Bar was an interesting experience, and then I ended up at like everybody does at the Cry Precision Party.
Those are wild.
Oh my gosh,
those are wild.
$1 million parties, So the one I was at that's memorable was the one that they had it in some stadium that was mothballed or whatever, and they had put a bunch of sand in there. They brought in truckloads of sand and built a motocross track around the outside, put in palm trees. They had some DJ, I think it was Deadmau5 or some DJ playing, a bunch of dancing girls. Of course, everything's free. And I'm standing there with a bunch of guys from CAG at that, and we're watching the motocross race around the outside of it, and I get a tap on my shoulder. I turn around. It's one of the logistics officers I deployed with from the CIA. He's like, "What's up, dude?" And it was the weirdest. It was almost like, and I was still dealing with a lot of after effects PTSD, and it was like, I realized that's what I went there for. Was just to see stupid stuff like that and make myself feel like I'm not alone in all this crap. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the last Cry party I went to was, they had midgets.
Yeah.
On these bands, that they were flinging them everywhere. Then they had the Mario Kart track, and the dudes were chucking shit at each other. And
The last one I went to, and it's been a couple of years. I've kind of been keeping it at arm's length now that I'm fully reintegrated into society. Right? was the one they had at the quarry. It was, you had to dress like Fred Flintstone.
Oh,
Remember
yeah.
that one?
No, I didn't go to that
So
one.
we pull up to that. I've got Dexter, and we pull up to that, and there's cops. Like nobody had told the local PD about it, and they're
Oh,
having
no
this
shit.
like. I mean, I've got a video on my phone. It's like an acre or two of like stuff. Like it looks like a carnival in the
Yeah.
middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And it just it blew me away, man. We had to take a slide down this slide to get into it and stuff. And I'm like,
Those guys go all
Yeah.
out for sure.
So-
It's hilarious. What's your from your book? What's your favorite story in there? What's one that stands out to you?
Man, there's so many. There's so many. I've got some funny ones. I've got some tragic ones.
Pick one, or pick a couple. That's what I like to hear. I like to hear the.
Well, I didn't put the Russian Contractor aircraft in there. I think I might have put it in the second one, which is called Relapse.
Okay.
And that's the one I'm going to give you,
Yep.
Relapse: The Cost of War. So you'll have to read the first one over Audible or over ebook. 'Cause
Yep.
It's the first one's out of print. Man, it probably was the dogfighting one in Kabul, like doing a snatch and grab at a dog fight.
Let me hear this one.
They have these huge mastiffs that they fight,
Mm-hmm.
and usually the Taliban aren't supportive of it, right? Because of the fact that it's gambling.
Yeah.
And there was an asset there that needed to be grabbed that had some information, and you can only pass off as indige when you're an American for so long, right? Especially because a lot of guys have like red or blonde hair, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Doesn't matter how big your beard is, like the gait you walk, the way you move yourself.
We're not them.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, you can be wearing the same clothes, you know. Although I'm telling you right now, the fact that a lot of these vehicles, especially these Land Cruisers that we used, have these VHF antennas that reach into the sky,
Yep.
that's a dead giveaway. So that was an interesting one. Ironically enough, I used intel that never came about, that somebody had passed, probably illegitimately. So it wasn't intel that I didn't have need to know about terrorist activity in Europe, where some of these cutouts for Al Qaeda would steal like a heavy loader or a garbage truck,
Okay.
or what their version of a semi would be over
Yeah.
here in the U.S. and drive it through crowds. And I put that in the book. And the irony is I didn't really think any of that would come to pass here necessarily, and now it's starting to manifest itself out because it's easier to do a large-scale mass killing with a vehicle than it would be unless you're going to build a bomb here. You know, you can have guys all you want, squirters with AKs or AR-15s that they can steal or buy or whatever, but you're never going to get the same body count as you would with a stolen truck. And look, New Orleans is a good example of that, right? That was just a full-size Chevy. It wasn't even a dump truck or a semi or something like that. And
the streets weren't even packed either.
right.
So
the guy picked a really, really bad time to do that. I know the argument at the time is that, hey, these guys were veterans. They weren't indige, so it's not like the border was an issue. And I'm like, where do you think they got all their, logistics and support?
Who's talking to them?
Yeah, who's talking to them? Who's providing them with, operational plans and target packages? So it just seems like it,
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And it's basic tactics too. Basic. I mean, you don't need anything besides. You don't even need a driver's license.
Yeah.
And that's what New Year's blows my mind that how many people packed downtown New York City for New Year's knowing
100%.
damn well what is in our country right now. I mean, you see what's going on across the borders. You see what's going on, how many people are coming across the border. You're not finding me anywhere near.
No.
Anywhere near a crowd
and I think
right now.
that's a common thread with veterans. In the book, I wrote about Oktoberfest in Munich. And this guy, they recruit an Algerian, because there's so many Algerians in Germany anyway.
Yeah.
They recruited an Algerian, and I believe in the way I had it in the book is they hold his family as leverage, and he ends up, or they recruit the Algerian. He ends up like finding another Algerian that's driving a garbage truck who's gainfully employed, shooting him, and then obviously driving it himself, and then running it through the crowds at Oktoberfest, which is, hundreds of thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really wanted any of that stuff to be not a template, but motivation for somebody here. But holy cow, we're come
living
full
it
circle
for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's just the beginning too. That's where it's kind of scary. It's that easy. It's that easy, and we live so comfortably that people they don't even give it a thought.
Yeah.
Zero thought.
So I guess to fast forward a little bit, wrote the second book. Second book didn't get as much attention, obviously, as the first, which it usually never does.
Yeah.
And then the third book I was in the process of writing when COVID hit, and then everybody was like, Audible and all the publishers were like, you're going to wait years to get this published. And it just
because of so many people were putting books out at that time,
I think
or
everybody was looking for a project to do at home.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, it's just like we've got a backlog.
Are you going to circle back on it?
I might. The projects I'm doing now are I think a lot more exciting, and this kind of leads me into my exposure with Hollywood.
Yeah.
And this is definitely worth mentioning is I befriended a guy who was a former Pathfinder and did a bunch of contract work in Iraq and Afghanistan with some of the soft guys, and he ended up falling into doing costuming, a high-end military costuming for movies.
What is it like? Looking over being the subject matter expert. What's
not just subject matter expert, but actually designing costumes, not just for the military, but also for the indige. Like if you're Taliban or if you're Somali, Somali warlord, stuff like that.
Yep.
And because he had exposure to it, and he did such a good job. He called me. He's like, "Hey man," he goes, "How would you like to come out? We're filming Terminalist Dark Wolf. How would you like to come out and lend a hand with doing some tech advising and maybe have a small role in one of the scenes, stuff like that." I mean, I'd love to do that. You know, but I had reservations because I had assumed Hollywood was so woke and DEI infused, and it is.
It's your first instinct.
Correct, but being on the set with such a great cast. I mean, Chris Pratt, Taylor Kitsch, guys that are patriots, Christians, and not to mention the fact that most of the writing staff are former Marines, former SEALs. Like it just felt like a community. Yeah. It was such a positive experience. And on top of it, a lot of the stunt guys, which I've kind of started to gravitate towards more of that line of work, are guys that, had done 5, 6 years in the team, 7 years in the teams, had been, Green Berets or Recon Marines and stuff like that. And I feel like I just really found a home. So I'm really working diligently to kind of get back on the sequel to Terminalist 1, which is where Chris Pratt, the next line of work for him in the novel series.
Yeah.
And then on top of it, I got the opportunity to meet and kind of become initially, before all this kicked off, become friends with Jack Carr. And we traded books, and we suited him up and let the dogs, do bite work on him and stuff at SHOT Show, and stayed in touch with them. And then Amazon picked up the series, and then it was just like, people get so busy they don't have time to do much else other than do their craft and provide for their family. So he was on set. I got to hang out with him again, which was really nice. Became friends with a lot of guys, including Taylor Kitsch, who's an amazing individual, does veteran work in where is he, in Montana? One of those small towns in Montana. He's got a place in, and he kind of has a veterans outreach program there. Loves to fly fish, which I thought was awesome, and has distanced himself quite a bit from Hollywood. So just a great experience, man, and I think it comes out this spring. Dark Wolf does, which is a kind of an offshoot of the book series.
Okay.
But it goes into Taylor's his character's development as now an agency asset coming off of the SEAL teams and stuff like that. So, and they did a really good job, man. I it's sensationalized as most most series are. They do a really good job with portraying it, and tactics and stuff are pretty on point. Weapons.
That's good. I see some things every now and then. I'm like, oh God, like they didn't have anybody on set to help with this.
So what blew me away, one of the first things that blew me away and actually got me in contact with Ian, who does the costuming for a lot of these. He did it for Oppenheimer. He did it for, just a ton of series. He did something recently for the new Spider-Man reboot, which
really?
I think Spider-Man has like World War I theme now or something like that. I can't remember.
You got to know your shit for that.
You do.
There's you take provinces, regions, countries, everything changes.
All the medals they wear, you name it, man, it has to be on point. He's an amazing guy for that. It's
pretty impressive.
But he did Linus, and that's how we got to know each other. Is I was like, when I saw the first Linus, I was like, who did this? I was like, somebody knew something, and he reached out over Instagram. He's like, that was me, man. He goes, I did a lot of it. I did the costuming and some of the advising, and I was like, no way. We formed a great friendship, and then he's like, oh, I'm not on Linus 2, and I'm like, well, I'm going to see how accurate Linus 2 is versus Linus 1, and we compared and contrast together and laughed about it.
We just finished that. It was actually well done. I wanted to hate it.
It was all right.
I wanted to hate it because I am woman, hear me roar bullshit. And, it's just like, the whole entire time she's trying to prove herself, but she's having a fucking meltdown in every episode because her family's falling apart.
Right.
But if you took all of that aside and like the whole wannabe G.I. Jane shit, it was done pretty decent, so it was at least entertaining enough that they had. I like the team more than anything, the dynamic of inside the team. I hate how everything automatically like has to turn gay and there's a lesbian part to every single. You're like, God damn, this is the luckiest freaking, informant that you guys have or whatever that one chick was. But yeah, other than that, I thought it was done decently. And I've talked to some Marine buddies like, hey, they watched it. I'm like, what'd you think? They're like, it wasn't bad. So instead of, you think they'd be trashing the whole thing just because who we are. And yeah, I thought it was at least the equipment, the gear, the lingo. That was all on point.
Taylor Sheridan got his spot in that.
Oh, he has to. That dude, every season and every show that guy's involved in, like, where's his debut?
100%.
He's got to show his face 100%. At everything, which is hilarious.
Honestly, like I liked it too. I think 1 was better. From what I understood, but there's some things you can pick apart. But I realized when you're on set. And I realized this because I had friends in the writer's room for Dark Wolf. You have to balance it between what the director wants. Because the director's like, let's get this helicopter with the sun in the background. And they want all these grandiose. And then you gotta be really purposefully political. And make it seem like it's their idea. Well, what do you think about this? Because this normally doesn't happen. So what do you think about this? And they're like, let's do that. You know what I mean? And that you have to. It's almost like a negotiation. Because
the creator's a creator.
Correct.
And then it's their vision. We want this helicopter scrape 20 feet off the ground. You're like, that's not gonna happen. So I get there's probably a good give and take relationship and having to let them know this is never gonna happen. But
100%.
Dude, I want to shift gears a little bit. You've been through a lot, lost your wife, which is I couldn't even imagine. Did you have faith through all that, or when did the?
Good point, and I probably should have addressed that later. So, like a lot of guys downrange, your faith kind of wanes quite a bit. You see some things, you do some things, you question God a lot.
100%.
Like a lot of veterans, a lot of guys downrange do.
100%.
I was saved since I was 16. So I carried God, and when I dropped him, which people tend to do a lot.
Absolutely.
He always has a way of kind of working himself back into your life, especially through people. And shortly after losing my wife, I literally heard an audible voice during a pretty low moment. I think me and the kids were headed to Sun Valley. I hadn't had Dexter yet, but I had the other family dog. I loaded the kids up. I just wanted to get out of town, out of the maelstrom sort of everything going on with the family and people calling out of the blue and stuff. And I stepped out into a snowstorm in January in Fairfield, halfway there, and I remember praying, just getting whipped in the face by high winds and snow, somewhere along the way. And I remember God saying to me, watch me rebuild you. And I remember that was like the most powerful, even when I recant it now, probably one of the most powerful moments I've ever had, actually hearing a still, small, audible voice, And I let him do that. Like obviously nothing is a direct line. You go through pitfalls and peaks and stuff, but he's done a really good job of that. And that was the other thing I was going to say about Hollywood that really restored my faith in not just Christianity but people, is there were so many people of great faith, so many people with great faith on that set, and people that would just steal off to say a prayer or
really
mention God. Chris Pratt's obviously a very professed Christian.
Yep.
There's other people that were just there for the right reasons, and I think glorifying God is something that I always put in the back burner.
Yep.
And nowadays, it's just always one of the first things that I discuss, because I know it's becoming kind of all the rage right now, and the NFL and the NCAA. But I think the military does a really good job of honoring the Almighty and really just giving credit for blessings that hey, we're still here, we're still alive. The ones that have passed obviously are in a better place. We're the ones that have to kind of carry that torch, so to speak. So yeah, super strong with me, and doing the due diligence of trying to pass it along to my children.
Sure.
I've got a great men's group that I go to, a bunch of F-16 pilots.
Where do you go to church?
So I don't go to church at this men's group location, which is Eastwind Community out by me. So I'm all the way in East Boise. I do go to Rock Harbor, and I split it between Rock Harbor and Calvary quite a bit, which kind of worked for me. I want a very masculine message, because unfortunately church nowadays leans towards more of the effeminate.
Keith does. I feel Keith does a really good job. He used to. I think they just moved, but he's 2 streets back right here.
Is he really?
His kids used to mow the lawn and tear up my sprinklers all the time.
He's no nonsense. And even on Christmas Eve, which was the service we went to, he was like, "Hey, I'm gonna lay it down. Like
for sure.
We're battling for souls here.
For
we're
sure.
on the 1 yard line."
Mm-hmm.
And I love that, man. I love that direct.
I never thought it'd be like I guess it's considered a mega church. It's massive and it's growing every day. That's the only shitty part about that. But when we first went, we sat down in front and we ended up in the youth section, like the teen youth section. And so I was paying attention because I grew up a pastor's kid, and same thing, military,
right?
The things you got to deal with, life, the atmosphere, you fall apart. You fall away real quick. And so it's taken me a long time to get reeled back into it. But when we went to Rock Harbor, I sat in that behind the youth, and there was, I don't know if it's a youth section, but there was all teens there. And I was watching because I have a young teenager, and I wanted to see in every one of those kids, I thought they'd be on their phones, and they were in the scripture, and they were highlighting, and they're in their Bibles, and they're taking notes.
Right? So that's good.
And I look at it as if you can capture the mind of a teenager during a service, you're doing something right. And yeah, we started going, and she goes to youth group every Wednesday there, and she loves it. And so we haven't been in a little bit, but obviously, life, and there's no excuse. So, but yeah, it's a great church, and we really enjoy it there. I mean, he speaks to the point. I like how the thing that I enjoy from him the most is that he speaks from the Bible. No interpretation. This is it. This is how it is. This is how it's laid out. And I like when he goes into, the relationship, the covenant relationship between a husband and wife, and goes into sex, and how he'll even say, he's like, hey, we're talking sex for the next couple weeks. If you don't want your kids here, he's like, you can email me all you want. This is part of the Bible. We're going through. He doesn't steer to the crowd's liking and give the audience what they want. He's goes right along with it. And I've always respected that. And that's what I look for in a church.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. like a lot of guys did, I thought I wasn't coming home, from these deployments, and I'd made peace with it, So when I did lose my wife, to suicide and had to raise my kids, I was angry. But as time went on, I realized, like, I always wanted to be a dad, and I hadn't gotten the opportunity. And like I said to you before, I'd still be deployed if she was alive, and I'd still be addicted to that risk, like a lot of guys are. I know guys that are still deploying that shouldn't be. One guy in particular, he died from the after effects of a motorcycle wreck, but his call sign was Dragon. He was a former 12th group. No, 12th group's been disbanded, but he jumped out of an airplane with a tactical nuke because he was part of those green light teams, and his back was so screwed up, and he would barely make the PFT, to qualify because he was so addicted to it. And I just didn't want that life. I wanted to be around my kids. And it's funny how things that you thought were a curse really were a blessing. So to be a single dad raising 3 kids on my own from 2016 on, I was like, God, you've been so good to me. I've been at every football game, every ballet recital, everything. Every moment my kids had, their first car, their first prom, and that's a huge blessing for me, man. And I can't deny that God like literally gave that to me through tragedy, which He often does through the Bible, right? But if you look at the Bible, and I take solace in this, is like God has used some of the most corrupt, awful people,
murderers, rapists,
yeah, you name it, man. And I read that all the time. I read into that all the time because I realize I'm so imperfect, and that's exactly why we're given grace, right? So, yeah. So
how's it, if you don't mind me asking, how's it been for your kids? Obviously, this has been almost 9 years ish.
Yeah, we're at 9. We're at 9 years.
How have they coped and dealt? If you don't mind me asking, I don't want to get personal.
It was the hardest on my oldest. He heard the 911 call, and it's funny because I had seen so many head wounds, and I could go on and on about some of the stuff I saw downrange, and then of course when I was here, I was running calls with Eagle Fire, so suicides, you name it, I'd seen it. So to have it happen to my own family and be on 911 calling for assist in the middle of the night when they were asleep. Because that's when it happened. He heard that whole conversation. And I was hard on him because he would do things like stress eat and hoard and do things that were manifesting his PTSD. And it wasn't the way I dealt with grief. It's the way he was dealing with grief. And I was very difficult on him because of that, because I didn't understand it. I only understood my grief.
Well, and you're probably also trying to learn how to be a father too.
Correct. Which I had, like, I was the guy at the soccer games that didn't have any warm clothes or snacks because I didn't realize that's what you brought. Now I became good at that. God was really good to allow me to learn the trade of being what moms do most of the time, so that I'm honestly like, I got this, and I got an extra coat and a pair of gloves and some snacks if your kid's hungry, if nobody else brought them. So I got there, but it was a process for me.
For sure.
So I think now that they're 19, 17, and 15, they're in a good spot. They're having to kind of figure out their way, and it's a different world for them than it was for us. But we try to emphasize that, hey, no one's going to be there for you. The old adage of no one's coming to save you but God. So if you're feeling lost, if you're feeling down, pray, because that's going to be your biggest and best connection. I'm not always going to be here either. Yeah. So
I'm sure it's been quite the challenge. I mean, because now, especially again, being a guy from your caliber, you're not just, you have son and daughters?
2 sons, 19 and 17 in, and my daughter's 15.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So now, I mean, you're learning the sensitive side of things.
The teenagers, no offense. Teenagers is the most stress I've ever had. Like, I would rather have a toddler puking and pooping at the same time, and cleaning that up than dealing with teenagers. And I think a lot of it is trying to ensure that, because my oldest son is taking a gap year, and he's working, and he's not going to college. And I'm like, no, you're not working 30 hours a week, seeing your girlfriend every day. Like, I don't mind that he goes to the gym because that's his therapy. I go, but you're not going to, you know what I mean, just live this life. I go, because when life is difficult in your 20s, it's going to be easier in your 30s. But you're living it so it's easier in your 20s, so it's going to be difficult in your 30s. So I really need you to have, some kind of plan. And he just resists. He's pushing back hard. And I know that's
nature.
Theme. Yeah.
It's nature. I'm sure that's why I'm out. I'm joining the military.
I know.
That's where a lot of us, I feel it's part of that. It's just part of the evolution, not in, science term, but as far as a young buck and finding his way and all that. And plus he's also, gone through a lot of trauma and shit. So that's deep rooted in there. And I can only imagine. And, but now you gotta play the dad tough guy role. Then you gotta fill in for the emotions and sensitive side of things. And I'm sure that is taking some while to.
Because I play the DI better than I play the
absolutely
nurturing, loving mother.
And it doesn't, but that doesn't work for.
It doesn't. Can't fix everything with a hammer, man. You know what I mean? And that's the only tool in my toolbox sometimes. So, it's what this has been one of my being a father to teenagers has been one of my hardest missions ever.
It's crazy to think, huh? And especially how involved I'm sure you are. Just being you. And,
heavily.
Because a lot of dads, it's like, oh, not bad, or they have whatever their excuses because they get to go and disappear for whenever they want. But now, I mean, you're entrenched in it.
Oh, I am, and it's kept me from accepting job offers that would take me away from the home and away from them because I want to see this through.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that's God's plan. I think God's like, that's exactly what I want you to do. Is I want you to see this through. So lean on me with your concerns. I'm gonna provide for you, which He has.
Yeah.
And maybe on the other side of this, there, you can do something new, and that means like 2 weeks in LA on a film set, or 2 weeks in Africa doing advanced teamwork, or that's understandable when they're teenagers. Grandma can come over and watch them, but I'm not going to be the father that it leaves them to their own devices, man.
For sure,
it's just not in the cards.
And you can't, especially nowadays, these kids are getting attacked from every angle. It's every platform's after them. There's an agenda being pushed. And that's where I think the teenage years are a super crucial years of their life.
I think I think the world's kind of fallen into the demonic, man.
It's good versus evil. Yeah. That's what my wife and I were talking about not too long ago. Is this election? It wasn't left versus right. It was good versus evil.
To some extent, everybody's susceptible to corruption. I do think
100%.
The cabal, the whole Clinton, Biden, Bush. Cabal is susceptible to corruption and evil a lot more than obviously the Trump side. I just pray like I would for even when Biden was in office that God kind of keeps our current president to be in his good graces and
for sure.
And just keeps him focused on the people of this country and what's right for us for sure. That doesn't keep me from worrying, but I try to give that to God every time I do. I'm like, this is yours. I'm laying at your feet. Take it, so I don't have to stress about it. And that's been amazing. On the heels of all this, like we talked about, of all this PTSD, trauma mitigation, just giving everything to the Almighty and saying, I'm concerned about this. Now it's yours.
Yeah.
Has provided me with so much stress relief. I can't even begin to tell you. Like the thing I mostly stress about now instead of work or bills or mortgages is what's my teenager thinking? What's he doing?
Well, when you got a 15-year-old daughter, so now the boys are sniffing.
Yeah, well, true. But she's actually the good one. I don't know how old your daughter is, but my daughter.
She's 16.
Yeah, see, my daughter's got it together.
Yeah.
She's got amazing grades. She's got a good set of friends. I know the parents very well.
Good.
She's done her prom, but very respectful, and so I really did extremely well with her.
Good.
So,
makes life much easier.
It does.
Much easier. I brag about her all the time. She's got to hear me talk about it, but yeah, it's nice when you have that relationship, and I still will always stress. I'll still always be that dad, but I could look back and be like, okay, when she's like, hey, we're just doing this, cool. I'm not
Oh, 100%.
You know, I get it. I know where she's at. I know her morals, values. Cool, go have fun. You know, but it's just the world is, and these boys. You got two of them. They're little shits, man. They're creative.
They are.
They're crafty. They're good at their art these days.
They go after what they want, for sure. I had a buddy that was second ID, I believe.
Okay.
He was a member of the SWAT team for Ada County for a while when he got back, and his daughter was like set to go to the Air Force. She almost had a basketball scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
She was in the CrossFit. And then we lost touch, and next thing I know, I was like, "Hey, how's your daughter?" And he's like, "Oh, she's dancing at one of the strip clubs here." And I'm like, "Why don't we go get her and play?" He goes, "Bro, she's an adult. She's 18, 19 years old, almost 19." She's like, "I can't do anything." He goes, "I've tried to talk to her and stuff like that." And I'm like, "Just pray about it." And he's like, "I'm not a religious guy." And
maybe it's time to start.
Yeah, I know, right?
You know?
But man, that freaked me out. I was like, "Oh boy!" And now I'm not dealing with stuff on that level with the boys, but they're just doing what they want. And
boys are boys, man.
yeah.
It's a switch.
Do you ever get the dad doesn't know anything? You don't know anything, dad. Like, I get that all the time, man. Yeah.
Fortunate with her, I think the little one's gonna be my little one's my clone. So I'm sure she's already like to the world. She just walks around and challenges everything. I'm like, you don't have to be like me, you know. But no, she's a riot. But I have buddies, and they're in that stage right now, and where you don't know what I'm going through. It's like we do. We were teenagers.
We're on the other side of it now.
Yeah, I've made it through. I'm here because I've been through these tracks. So I'm sure it's very interesting. I mean, I talk to my buddies all the time about how I think, you know, I was blessed by being a girl dad. I don't know how would I handled sons, because being that hardcore, got to do this, be that dad, Marine, jock, all that shit. Yeah. Now I'm like, okay, thank God I have girls, because one had to really, really soften me and make me look at life completely different, you know, versus a son where a little bit harder. But at the same time, you know, I treat my daughters obviously not as a son, because they're completely different. You know firsthand. And so the more sensitive and emotional and listening more that's what's really drawn it out of me is, okay, I gotta just shut the fuck up and listen, you know. And so but I think that's what God knew I could handle. And my wife swears that it's a Marine thing. She's like, all were dirtbags, a bunch of dirtbag young Marines running around the world. She's like, this is why all you have daughters now. She's like, you all asked, all of you asked for it. So
yeah. Well, mine is actually an in-family adoption. So Naya was a lot of tragedy in my wife's side of the family. So Naya was my wife's brother's illegitimate child, if you can believe it. And my wife wanted her, and here you go. Here's a great way to close this out with faith is I was running calls to keep my medical stuff current with Eagle Fire. Mm-hmm. And we were going to a meeting, a department meeting. And I was like, we're not adopting a daughter. I'm gone 8 months out of the year. We've got 2 healthy boys. I'm not doing this. And she's like, I want you to pray. I want you to pray about it. And I go, I'll give it one prayer. So I prayed on the way to the meeting, and I sat down next to my captain, who's now battalion chief. I was just hanging out with him yesterday at Eagle Fire, Rob Shoplock. And I go, hey, Rob, what's going on? He's like, well, we're adopting the foster child that we
just like that.
Yeah. And I go, well, why'd you do that? And then he quotes the scripture, you know, it's our duty to care for orphans and widows and stuff like that. And I was like, wow. So I was just like, okay, I hear what you're telling me. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I drive back and I said, I'm in, but I stepped off for another deployment, and baby was born at the time she had lost her brother to suicide as well, who he dealt with a lot of addiction issues, just like she did. And the girlfriend at the time of his was a big drinker. She drank through all 3 trimesters, so I fully expected it to be a fetal alcohol syndrome baby. And she sent me a photo, and she was gorgeous. And I was just like, God, I'm just leaving this with you and stuff. And she's turned out to be like just super bright child, very strong-willed, very good in school, very focused. And I've just been exceedingly blessed.
Good.
because of her. And I think listening to God, I did the right thing.
How old was she when you guys got the...
Right out of the womb.
Oh, that's your kid.
Yeah. Obviously, I'm legally the father, but, one of the nice things about Naya is that she's still her brother's blood, like not my blood, but her brother's blood, because still part of that family network. Mm-hmm. But man, I just don't see it any other way. And I've told her, I go, if you want to see your birth mom, you can. And she asked a lot of questions in her early teens, and she just hasn't said anything about it ever since. And just, because I know God's so huge on family, so I know that I get blessed sometimes, even though I'm, like you said, like a shitbag on occasion, because I put my family, first, and and we're willing to have some difficult months here and there, just because I want to be close to my family. I want to raise my kids. For sure. And stuff like that. So,
well, dude, I really appreciate your time, just coming on and get to know you, dude. We got some mutual friends, and they said we should definitely sit down and have a conversation. And
yeah, if you want a list of guests, man, I think I could.
I would love a list of guests. Yeah. That's the thing with this. I just want to just sit down and have conversations, and going through your faith and what you've had to deal with.
100%.
People are able to relate to anything, which is weird. I never realized pre-podcast. I listened to a couple of my buddies. I was big into Sean Ryan until he kind of went way too extreme for me. Every time I listen, I feel like the world is ending, and it's everything's doomy and ending, and everything's just negative for that. But so I'm not one of the type of people that'll sit and write to somebody after listening to an episode. If I connect with them, like, man, that was a badass guy on there, cool. And that's it. But since we've launched this, the amount of engagement we get from every episode of people, civilians being able to relate to military guys, just in the trade world, with, man, I didn't know guys struggled like this, or these guys I struggle the same way, or, man, I went through that as a child, and my parents battled that type of stuff, and I dealt with the same thing. So it's been pretty cool to be able to people that truly listen and get something from these episodes, and
love it.
And it's just a conversation. I don't want to drive it in a way where we're talking about this and these political topics, and I think there's enough of that out in the world.
There's plenty of it.
I want to give people just some entertainment to be able to listen to a guy that's done some crazy things, and
plenty of it, man.
Yeah, so that's kind of what it comes down to.
Indeed, my friend.
Well, I appreciate your time, dude.
Yeah,
Thank you very much
for the opportunity.
Come on, Puppers. He's like, get me out of here.
I will get you a book
I would
in
love
short
one.
order, man.
I actually went to get to the audio book, but I'm on